Good afternoon. Welcome to our church courtyard. This is one of my favorite places to write and to paint, and as you can see today I'm dabbling with a little art, trying to make nature come alive on canvas. I've been practicing for many hours and I think I'm getting somewhere, slowly but surely. Oh no, I'm not Jane Austen. Actually, I am Emily Bronte. So nice of you to join me today. I am one of the famous Bronte sisters. You may have heard of us. Why, we're all writers in our own right, and we've all been published. We've been writing since we were young. In fact, from a very young age, we produced something called bed plays, and in our bed plays, we would produce imaginative scenes of incredible lands that we would make up with great characters. Why, at the age of 16, my sister Anne and I created a world called Gondol. It's a fictional island in which many adventures happen, especially for the primarily female characters in our writing. And so we continue to write these bed stories in our heads, in our minds, and then also in our play from the ages of 16 all the way up through 27. Such fond memories of those times with my sisters. Why, we wrote right here in our drawing room together, side by side as we wrote our different novels. After all, my sister Charlotte came up with a novel, Jane Eyre, while I wrote Wuthering Heights. They premiered the same year and were published. Originally, I had hoped to keep my poems private, but my sister Charlotte found those poems, and she begged and pleaded with me to publish them. I was furious that she could betray me in such a way, but after careful contemplation and much discussion, I finally decided to publish a book of poems with my sisters. Now, I know people say that I'm unsociable and shy, and that I'm unnecessarily concerned with death and other such things, but I've had a hard life. My mom died when I was 3, and my 2 older siblings died just 3 years later. All of them died from illnesses, from cancer, from tuberculosis, from typhoid. It was a difficult time, and so I've overcome that time, and yet it is hard to forget when outside my window every day from which I write, I see the church cemetery where many of my family members, including those very 3, are buried. And so I miss them dearly, and I wish to capture that in my writing. We live in northern England here, in a town called Thornton. It's just right outside of Bradford, and this is where I've spent most of my life. Days here at our house are spent primarily doing housekeeping and chores, and during that time I like to let my imagination roam, and during that time I come up with my stories that I will sit down and write later on when the chores are done. I understand that you're interested in Romanticism. I'd be happy to share the aspects of Romanticism with you and some of my favorite writers. Many of mine are from America, but I also have some from Scotland and some from here in England. Jane Austen writes in Persuasion these really vivid descriptions of nature. And one of those descriptions is very sublime, very elevated in its use of language and imagery. She sets her scene in Lyme Regis, which is a real town in England. It's a charming seaside town where many people go on holiday. And of it she writes, "A very beautiful line of cliffs stretching out to the east of town, high grounds and extensive sweeps of country, and still more its sweet retired bay, backed by dark cliffs, where fragments of low rock among the sands make it the happiest spot for watching the flow of the tide and for sitting in unwearied contemplation." One of my favorite American romanticists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, talks about this individualism, this self-reliance that has become really a trademark of my writing and of my life. I'd like to share a few quotes with you from him. In his essay entitled Self-Reliance, Ralph Waldo Emerson talks about the individual spirit. He writes, "Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." I know that one well because I come from three sisters who are all into writing, and we often compete for that attention as writers. Why, the only person you are destined to become, says Emerson, is the person you decide to be. Insist on yourself and never imitate. Such great words. And so, I have done just as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. That's what I've done with my writing. I've left a trail for other romanticists to follow. I like to look more at the romantic side and to look at the tempestuous emotions that lie underneath the surface of our hearts. And so for that very reason, I wrote my novel Wuthering Heights, which has become a critical success here in recent months. In Wuthering Heights, we have the passionate Heathcliff, who grows up as an orphan and is taken in by a wealthy family and brought up and given quite an education and a position in society until his brother takes that all away from him and he must go out in the world and remake himself again, and he comes back in revenge to seek what he believes is rightly his. Of course, he's madly in love with Catherine at the time, and so I capture that passion in my novel as well. In it, I worked hard to focus on different aspects of Romanticism, from the wild and windswept Yorkshire moors that I described in all of their moodiness, to the complex characters and their wild emotions, with Heathcliff and Catherine and their intense forbidden love for one another, and in the death and supernatural aspects that I included, in which they connect with each other even after Catherine has passed on. In a scene, one of my favorite scenes, Heathcliff vows to open Catherine's coffin and passionately wishes to join her in her death, to climb in alongside her and share in that experience because he misses her so much. Those are the aspects of Romanticism that I love to write the most, to capture the human emotion and the soul. One of the best places to learn more about the supernatural is in the work of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe says, all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream, and his writing certainly shows that, especially his Telltale Heart. I love this tale about a man who is riddled by guilt after committing a crime that initially he felt pretty good about, but the more he thinks about it, and when the police come to question him, he starts to feel guilty, and his conscience gets the better of him. In fact, the more guilty he becomes, the more he imagines hearing the beating of a heart underneath the floorboards where he's buried the man that he has killed. And so, as the story goes, the heart becomes louder and louder, and the beating becomes more and more ferocious until finally the madman gives himself away to the police because he cannot stand this beating of the heart any longer. After all, he thinks that the man he has killed, his ghost has come back to seek vengeance on him. Moving on to the American writer Washington Irving. Washington Irving wrote The Devil and Tom Walker. Oh, it's such a very amazing allegorical piece, and I love the symbolism that creates that allegory. For instance, the devil who represents temptation, or Tom and his wife who represent greed. Tom also represents hypocrisy because while he goes back to church, he's still cheating people and collecting on their mortgages. And so I hope today you've learned a little bit more about Romanticism. Thank you for joining me here, and I hope that next time you'll drop by for a spot of tea.